Okay, this is John Dargan again. Just to go through the assignment guide here, the opening page is an image of the Benin bronzes, which are in the British Museum. So this assignment guide is slightly less formal than the usual assignment guides you'll get, but this offers some information about how you're going to, what we're expecting, I guess, and maybe some guidance on how and what it is we're asking you to look at. So what are we asking you to do? You've been asked to find an archival material. I think the exhibition Women in Revolt, I don't know if anyone saw that recently, made a really good use of archival material that was gathered from different locations to kind of tell a story about women that were women artists and women activists. So we've asked you to find an archival material, a collection, a museum, or a library to respond to visually. Well, why do we do that? It's a sort of standard way for artists and designers to respond to something real. So what it does, it kind of gives you a thing to kind of bounce your ideas off. And this is why we want you to kind of really embed that within what you're doing at the start of year 2. So what is an archive? Well, it's a collection of items that show evidence of particular activity or a thing that happened. It can also be a building. The British Library is an archive, and it's often where historical records are kept. So these are usually primary sources of events and activities, and collected by people that think they might have significance. And they're catalogued, these objects and artifacts are catalogued and carefully looked after for people to look at in the future. And they're looked after carefully because they want them to last as long as possible. What is a collection? A collection is usually slightly more specific, could be more object-based, less paper-based than an archive, or it can be. Usually contains objects that can be shown to the public. Collections can be private, collected by individuals like the Sir John Soanes Museum, or by the state, or by institutions like the Canterbury Museum, run by the Royal College of Surgeons, which, if you're interested in anatomy, is a good place. You can Google it, good place to visit if you're, it has lots of kind of medical specimens and jars, if that's of interest. What is a library? A library will contain books, of course, but large-scale institutions like the British Library collect all kinds of media, and that's kind of what Beyond the Baseline was about, the exhibition that we've been talking about for the summer project. And it will collect all kinds of media, such as DVDs, CDs, anything printed, posters, things like that. What is a museum? So a museum is usually a permanent institution, one that's open to the public. What it displays is the museum's interpretation of what it has in its collection. Museums usually hold more objects than they can display. So they usually have a kind of vast back kind of warehouses full of objects carefully looked after and catalogued. What they choose to display from that catalogue can really vary, and the choices made in the past are different to the ones made today. So that's an interesting way to think about how you might look at an archive, because you might, be able to get access to an archive and find something you think is very interesting that maybe not so many people know about. And that might depend on where you look and what kind of journey that kind of looking takes you on. I mean, the choices that are made to be shown in the museum are usually influenced by what's happening in society. So, 100 years ago, when the British Empire was still a thing, the way museums would be organized would be very different. And what would be collected would be very different, and there'd be assumptions and biases that people would have about what should go on display. So we want you to start by visiting this exhibition Beyond the Baseline. It's an exhibition in the British Library, and it's a fantastic example of how two academics, Dr. Alima Gray and Dr. Michael Riley, decided to interpret some materials in the archive of the British Library. So this exhibition hasn't been organised by the British Library. The British Library are hosting what has been found by these two academics, and they've decided to interpret these materials or show these materials, tell a story, showing their interest in Black British culture and the influence of African and Caribbean music on British music. So that led to an awareness raising exhibition that they hope broadens our understanding of Black British music. Black British music is more than a soundtrack, it has transformed British culture, which is a statement that I think is very interesting. I think there's lots of evidence to support it. So they looked at an archive to raise awareness of the influence of Black British music. Okay, so that's where their interest was. You know, they had a love of Black British music, presumably, but also they had a sense that its impact hadn't been acknowledged. They'd found something new, if you like, a new point. So Dr. Gray and Dr. Riley had a desire to make a point about British culture. Their belief was that British culture had been enriched by Black British music. They found evidence in the British Library and transformed and interpreted that evidence into a visual story, in this case, an exhibition and accompanying publication. So that's interesting. It's not just one thing, you know, an exhibition that they've gathered and designed together. It's also a publication. In other words, they wanted to make a point about something overlooked or misunderstood. In this case, the influence of Black people on British culture, and possibly also a counterpoint to discrimination. So it's like, it's a kind of positive story that maybe attempts to address the negative stories about people of color that abound in our kind of press. So what might your point be? And it really depends on what you sort of look at yourself and what interests me, you know, and it can really stem from something. Say, for instance, you know, you love products, you know, you might go to the Museum of Brands and then think about certain kinds of products, and you know, you might want to just say, look at the kind of the way things were designed, and you know, that's what interests you, and you know, and you want to talk about, you know, what you like will be different to others, and this is where we're kind of looking for you to sort of become, you know, just slightly more individual. Can it be an issue like discrimination? Potentially, that's like a sub issue, I think, beyond the baseline. It could be a love, it could be about fashion. If you love fashion, it's really up to you how to choose what to respond to. So identify an institution that you can visit. This is important. You don't have to go to something and stick with that. You can kind of change your mind. You can visit lots of different ones, but it's got to happen in the summer. An institution that houses an accessible archival collection or a permanent collection of some kind that is platforming a temporary curated selection of archival material as an exhibition. It should be somewhere you can visit in June. Maybe you can plan to go back there, because sometimes you need to go back to kind of think, well, actually, this is missing. What else do I need? It should connect to a sphere of interest of yours that you want to explore in your practice. It can be what you enjoy or what interests or excites you. So it's got to kind of, for you to have the enthusiasm to make this piece of work, it's got to connect with something you like doing, like you might like illustration, you might want to, you know, draw the objects that you've found in the collection, or it might be photography or filmmaking. It really depends on you, what your sphere of interest is and what excites you visually. So the reason we want you to go to beyond the baseline is to use that visit to see how an archive was interpreted. So as I mentioned in the previous video, write about why you think they chose the artifacts they did. When visiting an archive, write down different issues, objects, subjects, or topics you could focus on. When you're there, also gather as much visual information as you can on your visits. And this research will form the basis for your work in term one, studio and contextual units, to choose something that you can respond to visually through writing, rich with content and potential for EDI analysis. So just a few more comments here. What do we mean by interpretation? So an interpretation is explaining the meaning of something or offering an opinion about something. So if your point is about the trends in fashion, you might look at the oldest garment in the UK at the Petrie Museum of Egyptian Archaeology in London. There's a 5,000-year-old garment there. Or you might compare this to the collection of paper dresses at the Atopos Institute in Greece, or garments from the V&A or the Fashion Textile Museum. It doesn't just have to be one collection. You can draw together different things from different places that might help, create an interesting kind of connections between different garments. You might then organize this research into a publication, a guide to trends in fashion history in response to the archival material. So that's the interpretation. What do we mean by research? Research is written and visual information. Some can be created by you through drawing and photography. This is primary research. Other research can be found by reading, note-taking, building documents with relevant information, gathering images from reference sources. This is secondary research. The summer project needs you to have both, as you need information to work with on your projects in year 2. So without this, you'll find those projects very difficult. So what do we mean when we say what others have said about it? So in other words, there might be critics of a collection. Collections often been interpreted by different people or even institutions, and interpretations vary. People might refer to a museum collection, a book, or newspaper. These differing opinions form what is called a debate. So this is an important aspect, I guess, of a general way of finding out more about museums is people's opinions about museums. So finding out how they interpret a collection can show how you might interpret it. So finding out more information basically about a collection and what other people have said helps you better understand that collection and better understand yourself and how you're going to respond to that collection. Many objects in museums in the UK were brought to Britain in the time of the British Empire. This might mean they were acquired by force or bought cheaply. Some of the countries where the objects originated are campaigning for the return. Your point or issue may be unfairness. You could look at the Benin bronzes. One of our students last year looked at these objects and made her a final animation about this. These sculptures are the subject of a request from the Nigerian government to be returned from the British Museum back to Nigeria. The debate and controversy around the Benin bronzes is extreme. It's quite political, but knowing what others have said about a collection or archive can change your opinion. So research as much as you can when looking at an archive. So if we go down the list here, it does say how the objects got to the museum, and it does say something about the request and the status of the discussions about the Benin bronzes. So there's a kind of a fairly clear example. So what do we mean in the project brief when we say, my own thoughts about what I find? So for us, the way you can interpret a museum collection, archive, etc., in any way you wish. The units requires that you develop professional independence. So to be independent in this context is you have to look at a collection and decide what you like or dislike about it, basically. So if we go to the Beanie House of Knowledge in Canterbury, that has a kind of wide variety of objects. There's a couple of, I always find fascinating, a couple of cases of stuffed birds. So these birds are displayed as if they're alive and sitting in nature. They are beautiful objects, but are also a bit strange and unsettling. They look lifelike, but obviously motionless and are dead. So this strangeness is visually engaging. In other words, it's kind of interesting to look at because they're great to draw because you can study them because they're not moving. But you might hate the fact that it's been killed and stuff like this. You might use part of a collection, like there is in the beanie, like these stuffed birds, to make a point about humans using animals for enjoyment, amusement, or entertainment. Or you might love the fact that you're able to study a beautiful and hard to find animal to appreciate its glory and beauty. Okay, so you might kind of just be keen to draw something you think is amazing and make a collection about these birds, and then you're able to talk about these particular birds. It just depends on which angle that you want to come from, and this is where the professional independence comes, that you making decisions about what you think about what you find. So it really depends on what you think and what you believe in is what we mean by your thoughts about what you find.